my channel. In today's video, I'll be showing you how I made this dress. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. This is the thrifted king size bedsheet I got from the thrift store for $6.99. We would need two parts. The skirt part, which is going to be a circle skirt, and the upper part. So we're going to be starting with the upper part of the front piece, and we would need two rectangles. So the lines I'm drawing are going to be my starting points. Now I'm going to measure 1 inch all the way across, and that's going to be for the straps. The next thing would be to mark from the starting point, which is going to be my chest line, all the way to my under bust. So that would be 8 inches, and I'm going to add 1 inch seam allowance to join it to the lower part. Now the width is going to be your bust circumference divided by 4 multiplied by 1.5. So for me that was 12.75. I'm going to mark that all the way down. Then I'll connect the dots. The next thing would be to mark the armhole measurement. So I'm just going to mark 3 inches right on top, and then I'll come down by 4 inches downwards. At the time I filmed this video, I used 4.5, but it was too much, so I reduced it to 4 inches. So I'm just going to connect that together. So I'm just going to cut this out, and we would need 2 of this rectangle. So I'll use this piece to cut out the next piece. So I'll place it on my fabric right sides facing, and then I'll cut the other piece out. So both pieces are going to be the upper part of the front piece. The next thing we are going to do would be to cut out the upper part of the back piece. So that's going to be my starting point, and I would also draw a line all the way down, and that would be my starting point as well. We would also be needing 2 rectangles for the upper part of the back piece, but I'm going to start by marking the zipper allowance. I would mark 1 inch all the way down, and the length is going to be 10 inches. And then I'm going to add 1 inch seam allowance to join the skirt part. So the next thing would be to mark our measurements. So right on top, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4. And then I'll add 1 inch seam allowance. So mine was 8.5, and then I added 1 inch seam allowance. And then I would also mark my waist measurement divided by 4 plus 1 inch seam allowance. All of these measurements are going to be after the zipper. I'm just going to connect all of the dots together, and then I'll cut that out. So we'd also need 2 of this. I would use this to cut out the other piece. The next thing to do would be to cut out the circle skirt, and both sides should be on fold, just like this. And we are going to be cutting on the bias. So I'm going to be marking my waist circumference plus 2 inches divided by 6.28. And that's the standard. So for me, that was 5 inches. I would mark 5 inches all the way around. And once I was done doing that, I'm going to add 1/2 inch seam allowance right on top. So the next thing would be to determine the length of the skirts. So for me, I wanted mine to be 27 inches. And then I added 1 inch to hem the bottom part, which is 28 inches in total. I'll mark that all the way round. And then I'll cut this out. So I'm going to start by cutting out the upper part first, before cutting out the length of the skirt itself. So just like this. So this is what it looks like on fold. I'm going to open this up and I'm just going to cut through the sides so that we can have two of them, one for the front and one for the back piece. So I'm just going to start with one of them. I'm going to pick the front piece. So the front piece is going to have a slit. So what we're going to do would be to determine the width of the lower part with your tape measure. So I'm just going to do that now. So in total, I had about 98 inches as the width, and then I divided that by 3. And then I'm just going to cut that out now. So you'll be joining it back together, right sides facing, and then you'd have to determine how long you want your slit to be. I'll pin that down and I'll run a straight stitch all the way from the top to where I want my slit to be. Then I'm going to leave the rest open. So the next thing would be the straps. I made them both 20 inches long and then 2 inches wide. So I'm just going to fold both sides in just like this, and then I'll fold it again, pin it down, and then run a straight stitch all the way down. And then I'll repeat the process for the other one. And then run a straight stitch. So now to the sewing. So this is the front piece. I'm just going to pin this down together, right sides facing. And then I'll determine the midpoint. So I had 9 inches right there. My midpoint was 4.5. So at that midpoint, I'm just going to run a straight stitch all the way down, and then I'll leave the upper part open. So the next thing would be to cut out the other piece for the front part. So initially we cut out from the chest line to the underbust. Now we need from the underbust to the waistline, and your fabric should be on fold. At the very top, I'm going to mark my underbust measurement divided by 4 plus 1 inch seam allowance. And from my underbust to my waistline is 3.5 inches. And then I'll add 1 inch to join it to the skirt. So I'm going to mark my waist measurement divided by 4, and then I'll add 1 inch seam allowance to that. I'll connect this together and then I'll cut that out. So that's going to be the second piece for the front part. So here is what I was trying to explain. The upper part is going to be gathered together, and then we'll have to join it to the lower part we just cut out now. So now to the sewing machine. I'll be sewing halfway through the upper part of the front piece, and then I'll leave the other part open. What we're going to do to the upper part we left open is to hem the left part just like I'm going to do, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So here it is. The next thing would be to fold the part for the straps. I'll pin it down and then I'll run a straight stitch for both sides. So here is what it looks like. The next thing would be to run a basting stitch at the very bottom. So I'll turn my sewing stitch to the longest stitch on my sewing machine and I'll run that. I would also sew the straps. And here's what they look like. So the next thing would be to use my pin to insert the straps. So I'm just going to insert it all the way to the end. And once that was done, I'll take out the pin and then close it up with a stitch. So I'm just using a pin to secure it, and this is what it looks like after it's been done. So the next thing would be to gather the lower part, which is my underbust. So we are going to gather the lower part to my underbust measurement divided by 2. Remember the piece we cut out that was on fold. So that was the underbust measurement divided by 2. The next thing will be to determine the midpoint, and then I'll place a notch at that midpoint. I'll join the upper part to the lower part just like this, right sides facing, and then I'll run a straight stitch. And here is what it looks like. So now to the skirt part of the front piece. So the slit has been sewed from the top to where I wanted my slit to be. I'm just going to open it up and then I'll iron it out. So you're going to iron out the remaining part just like I'm doing. You fold it a little bit and then iron it out. I'll turn it to the right side and I'll close it at the point where the stitch ends, and then I'll go all the way down. So I'm just closing it at the point where that stitch ends, and then I'll pivot to the other side and then I'll run a straight stitch all the way down. So this is what it looks like. The next thing would be to join the upper part to the skirt part. So I'll pin this down right sides facing, and then I'll go run a straight stitch. And you should have something like this when you're done. The next thing will be to move to the back. Here is the skirt part of the back piece. I will divide this into 2 equal parts because it's going to have a zipper. So we have 2 of them now. I will join the skirt for each of the back piece to the upper part. So here is my zipper part. I'm just going to place them right sides facing. I'll pin it down and then run a straight stitch all the way across. And you should have something like this for both of them. So the next thing would be to join them together right sides facing. By the way, do not mark on the right side of your fabric. So I'm just going to pin them down together. So I'm going to introduce my zipper. I do not have an invisible zipper, but if you do have one, you could use that. I'm going to mark the point where the zipper ends. So from the top down to the part where the zipper ends, I'm going to run a basting stitch, and from that point where it ends all the way down, I'll run a straight stitch. So here is what it looks like. The zipper has been fixed, and then I hemmed the top part a little. The next thing would be to join the front piece to the back piece. So I'll pin them down together again. And then I'll go run a straight stitch. So here is what it looks like. So the next part will be to cut out the sleeves. I have 2 rectangles and I'm just going to fold them together just like this for both sleeves. This will be my starting point. And I want the length of my sleeves to be 14 inches plus 1 inch hem allowance, making it 15, which is what I have in total. So the next thing will be to mark 4 inches, which is my cap's height. I'm just going to mark 4 inches all the way. So once I was done with that, I would like to mark the length of the sleeves, which is 15 inches. At the very top, I'll mark 12 inches, which is my bicep measurement. This is on fold. By the time I open it up, it's going to be double because it's going to have an elastic band. So I'll create the casing for the elastic, 1 inch all the way. So right on the cap's height, I'm just going to leave it as 15 because I want it to be very full. I'm just going to connect the top to the cap's height with a slight curve just like that. And then at the bottom part, which is the length, I would leave it at 12 inches, which is the same as my bicep. Both the top and the bottom is going to have an elastic band. So I'll connect the bottom part to the cap's height just like that. So I'm just going to cut this now. So for each sleeve, I'm just going to join the sides together and then I'll go run a straight stitch all the way. And here is what it looks like. I opened up the seams for both of them. So I'm just going to turn it to the right side and then I'll fold the upper part, which is going to be the casing for the elastic band. I'll pin it down and then go run a straight stitch all the way around, and I'll repeat the same process for the other sleeve. So here are my elastic bands for both sleeves. They are about 9 inches long. I'm just going to use my safety pin to insert the elastic band. So when I get to the end, I'm just going to use a zigzag stitch to close that off. And here is what it looks like. I'll repeat the same process for the bottom part. And you should have something like this. So now it's time to join the sleeves to the dress. So I'm going to attach both armholes together at the midpoint, just like that. And then I'll pin them down together. I'll run a straight stitch and I'll repeat the same process for the other sleeve. And you're basically almost done. The last part will be to hem the bottom part. You could serge all the way around and then just hem it once and you're done.